Welcome. My name is J.B. Shank. I am a faculty member in the Department of History at the University of Minnesota, and I'm also the director of the Center for Early Modern History, which is one of the sponsors of this event and the series of lectures that has gone with it, along with the Terrence J. Murphy Center at the University of St. Thomas. And what I'm going to do here is say a little bit about the context of these events, how we're approaching them, and then explain to you the logistics of this evening's events. And by the end of this, you should be very clear on what the role of everybody is in your role. And just so you know, there will be a opportunity at certain moments for the audience to ask questions and, in fact, to render a verdict on this as well. So let me start by just giving some thank yous. Billy Junker, the director of the Murphy Institute, was excited about this idea, which I'll explain a little bit more where it came from here in my other introductions. So thank you to him, and thank you to Sean Harris, who's done incredible work for all this. They're not here right now, but the administrative staff at the Center for Early Modern History has also done a lot of work on this. And then especially let me thank our judges, who I'll introduce here in a minute, but who are doing this really out of the kindness of their heart, and it's really exciting to have such distinguished judges here playing that role. And then finally, I'd actually want to give out a huge thank you to all the students. They received an email from me back in August. They had all signed up for a course on Galileo, and they received an email from me back in August. They hadn't met me. They had no idea what this course was, where I was asking them, can you be free on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving at 3:30 in the evening to do a reenactment, a public reenactment of a trial of Galileo? I thought we might get a mass exodus from this class at that moment, but we didn't. And throughout this whole process, they have been really terrific and enthusiastic, and I'm really excited about this, and I think they are too. But I just want to thank them for this because it's sort of above and beyond the call of duty of your average undergraduate class, what they're doing here. So, take us back to 1610. Galileo Galilei, who at that point is a professor of mathematics at the University of Padua, connected to the Republic of Venice, hears of a new instrument, what he calls his occhiale, but which will come to be called a telescope, using lenses to magnify things. He hears about the existence of such an instrument, and he's a skilled mathematical artisan, worker with lenses and other sorts of things. He immediately sees that he could produce one, and he does. And he produces a very, very good one. The one thing maybe to keep in your mind as we go through this whole process is I've never read a single scholar of Galileo on either side of this say anything but highly praiseworthy things about Galileo's telescope, the instrument itself, and his ability to use it to do what we now call telescopic astronomy. In 1609-10, he develops this instrument, and then he points it at the sky. And he proceeds to reveal some interesting things. He looks at the moon. And with the magnification he has, he's able to discern that the moon is not a pure and sort of a supernaturally pure and smooth orb. It's in fact very Earth-like. Mountains, craters, valleys. He points it at the Milky Way and discerns that milky, creamy space in the sky to be, in fact, thousands, if not millions, of stars that are not visible to the naked eye. And he proceeds to reveal other stars that are not visible to the naked eye using his telescope. He finally points it at Jupiter, and he sees a number of star-like bodies that had never been seen before that also he noticed are moving around, it seems, Jupiter. This is evidence to him that there are other planets like ours that have a planetary body that move around it. He very quickly and cleverly names those four moons of Jupiter the Medicean stars, after the Grand Duke of Tuscany's family, the Medici. And he does this for a very particular reason, because when he packages what he's discovered into his 1610 book, Sidereus Nuncius, he uses it as a very successful patronage ploy to try to get into the service of the Grand Duke. And that succeeds. And in 1610, he becomes the mathematician and the philosopher of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, which is the title he has for the rest of his life. What he then begins to do as the Grand Duke's mathematician is do more observations. Particularly starts to look at the sun, looking at other planets as well, but with the suns, he discovers sunspots. At this point, one should say that the telescope is not, in fact, only Galileo's device by this point. Very many others immediately accept it as a new instrument, including Jesuits, who are at the leading edge of mathematical science in this period, and others. He begins to get into arguments, particularly with Jesuits, about the nature of these spots on the sun. He thinks that the spots on the sun are best explained, the phenomenon of them, because of the motion of the sun. He thinks the sun is turning, and that it might in fact be the case that the sun has more than that motion, that it might be moving relative to the earth. Well, to make such a claim is to challenge what at that point was the most fundamental cosmological idea, which is that the earth that we stand on and that shows us to our common sense in everyday life to be utterly immobile may in fact be mobile, and that the sun, which appears to rise and fall in our skies, may in fact be the stationary one. This is the claim that Copernicus had made in 1543, and goes by the Copernican hypothesis, and I'm saying this because these are terms you're going to hear a lot here in the next hour and a half, and would supersede or overturn the older understanding of the cosmos that had been developed by the Alexandrian astronomer Ptolemy. So the Ptolemaic and the Copernican starts going into question. What is doubly controversial about whether or not the Ptolemaic or the Copernican system is correct is a set of readings about Holy Scripture that are built or were built upon the Ptolemaic understanding. The most famous of these is in the book of Joshua, where God is said to stop the sun in its motion and in order to extend a day and to perform a miraculous intervention. The literal word of Scripture is God stops the motion of the sun. That fits really well with a Ptolemaic understanding where the sun moves and the earth is stationary. If you instead contend that the sun is stationary and the earth moves, then you have a challenge to Scripture. And it's based on this, the astronomy and the scriptural issues that it raises, that a set of controversies erupt in 1613, 14, 15 about these issues. You might hear in the course of these presentations names like Ingoli, Foscarini, Bellarmine. These are all clerics at the time, many of whom were also serious scientists and serious users of telescopes, who are beginning to try to make sense of this. Galileo himself is called into it, and in many ways these controversies are associated always with him because of his telescopic observations. And he writes a series of letters in this period, 1615-16, one to his disciple Benedetto Castelli, and the other to the Grand Duchess Christina, who's his patron at the Medici court, laying out his understanding of the relationship between science and Scripture. Well, this is the first moment in the Galileo affair because this sets up a set of questions which the church feels it needs to resolve. And in 1616, it does that. And the reason that we are doing this series of events, the lectures and this trial reenactment, is because we're at the 400th anniversary of this event. The events, as you'll see, that were the cornerstone of the Galileo affair, which unfolded about 20 years later, 15, 20 years later. And I'll just read from you from the decrees of 1616, issued by the Holy Office. It says, it basically approves a reading of two propositions. The first proposition, the sun is the center of the world and entirely immobile by local motion. In other words, the heliocentric hypothesis. Sun at the center of the world and entirely immobile. The sun is immobile. The response of the Holy Office. All the members who examined this said the proposition is foolish and absurd in philosophy, which basically means in terms of science. The science of this doesn't hold up. And it's formally heretical insofar as it contradicts the express opinions of Holy Scripture in many places, according to the proper sense of the words, in order to the common exposition and sense of the Holy Fathers and theologian doctors. Second proposition. The earth is not the center of the world. The Ptolemaic position is wrong. Nor is it immobile, but it moves completely according to itself, even with a daily motion. So it not only moves relative to the sun, but it turns on its axis. The censor. All said that this proposition receives the same censor in philosophy and touching theological truth. It is at least erroneous in faith. So with 1616, we have these clear lines drawn about all this. And for the next decade, Galileo proceeds to do various things. There's a set of comets that appear in 1618, 19 that lead to more telescopic debates with Jesuits about how to understand them. But by and large, the issues are settled, it seems, in 1616. The big change occurs in 1624. And in particular, the change is, there's a number of changes in 1624. And the most important, perhaps, is that a new pope comes to the church. And he is a friend of Galileo, a Florentine, Maffeo Barberini, who becomes Pope Urban VIII. Galileo traveled to Rome when he heard this news and had several meetings with Pope Urban VIII. And although there's no documents documenting what exactly went in his head at this moment, and this is the essence of the Galileo affair, it's safe to say that he came back to Florence thinking that there were opportunities maybe to revisit what had happened in 1616. He therefore began composing a work that would do that. It ended up being published in 1632 as the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, Ptolemaic and Copernican. He worked with censors and the Catholic Index to get this published. He agreed to make certain changes to it from earlier drafts. And he thought, in his mind, that it was acceptable according to the terms that had been set in 1616. But between the fall of 1632, after the book was published, and the summer of 1633, June in particular, basically he learned that his calculation was wrong. The dialogue was brought before the index. It was declared to be in error in various respects. Galileo was asked to come to Rome to address these concerns. He was charged with vehement suspicion of heresy for defending the Copernican doctrine made contrary in 1616, and also as someone heretical, had vehement suspicion of heresy in terms of his understanding of Scripture. In June of 1633, after weeks of depositions and deliberation, the church ruled that Galileo was in fact guilty. He was declared guilty of vehement suspicion of heresy, sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a house arrest, which he did in his own villa outside of Florence in the town of Arcetri. So this is the context, and what we are going to do today is we are going to re-enter those moments, April to June of 1633, and we are going to try to bring back to life the issues of that trial. The key thing to understand about this is that this is going to be done entirely in terms of what was possible in 1633. That's what makes this trial so compelling, is that we have very different understandings of what should have happened or what did happen with Galileo now. But in 1633, things weren't as simple. So this trial is going to be pursued in terms of 1633 and only 1633. We have here three very distinguished judges who are going to listen to the arguments for and against. And let me just briefly introduce them. Go right down here. Susan Stabile is a professor of law and is director of the University of St. Thomas Office for Spirituality. She is among the nation's leading scholars on pensions and employee benefits and on the intersection of Catholic social thought and the law. Father Patrick Tobin was ordained a Dominican priest in 2010 and holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of Michigan. He teaches courses in chemistry and environmental chemistry at the University of St. Thomas, where he also serves as an associate chaplain for campus ministry. Finally, Dr. Peter Distelzweig is an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of St. Thomas, who specializes in early modern philosophy and history and philosophy of science and medicine. His present research explores the interactions between philosophy, science, and medicine in early modern Europe, and he has taught courses on Galileo before. So these three judges are going to listen to the case. listen to the evidence in terms of what could be known in 1633. And the case itself is going to be delivered by our teams of students. We have the prosecution on the left here, to my left, of Galileo, and the defense on the right. And we're going to move in 4 stages. The way this is organized is we've broken the issues of the trial into 4 core issues. And we're going to hear a prosecution case against Galileo on each of these issues, followed by a defense of Galileo on these issues. After each of the teams on each of the topics speaks, the judges will be able to ask questions of the 2 sides. And then we'll move, so 20 minutes total for the first group, 20 minutes for the second, 20 minutes for the third, 20 minutes for the fourth. During that part, I would ask the audience, please, to just listen and observe. But if you have questions, write them down or make a note of them, because afterwards we will have time for questions, and you can ask questions of the students and of me and of the judges and of anybody. And then I'll just quickly say the 4 topics are the question of astronomical and empirical observations. What was it possible to know astronomically and empirically about the heavens in 1633? Second, this fundamental question about the motion of the Earth, which in many ways it's the central question that it all boils down to. Third, the interpretation of Scripture. How do we interpret Scripture? What's the relationship between science and Scripture? And then fourth, politics and procedure. What were the terms set down for Galileo? Did he in fact follow what he was supposed to follow? Et cetera, et cetera. That's how we're going to proceed. After we have all the case and the questioning completed, our judges will retire to chambers to deliberate and to come up with their verdict. That will be the first moment when we can open it up for questions. We'll have questions. But at that moment as well, you will be able to render your vote. And then we will come out, listen to the judge's verdict. We'll see what the audience verdict is. We can stay around and have some more questions, and then we will proceed out to the atrium for the reception. Okay? Clear enough? All right. So with that, to stay on time, I want to get us started right away. And so first topic is the issue of astronomical and empirical observations. We have 2 members of the prosecuting team, Thomas Arneson and Kuhn Schulten, who are described right up there. And we'll get started. I will play the role of timekeeper. They have very strict time limits, and we will stick to that. And so let's begin.
First of all, I'd like to say that the Church is an authority in astronomy. Just because the Church condemns Galileo's support of Copernicanism, that doesn't mean that the Church is anti-science or anti-astronomy. The Church needs accurate astronomical observations in order to maintain an accurate calendar. This is vital to ensuring that holy days like Christmas and Easter fall at the appropriate time of year. The Church simply requires a level of proof that Galileo simply doesn't present for Copernicanism. Most of his arguments rely on assumptions alone. However, Copernicanism is not the only recourse for accurate astronomy in response to the failings of the Ptolemaic system. The Tychonic system resolves the problems with the Ptolemaic system equally well. On the left is the diagram of the Ptolemaic system. In this system, the Earth is still the center of the universe, which means it's geocentric, and this does not conflict with Scripture like the Copernican heliocentric system does. There is a stationary Earth and a mobile sun orbiting around it. However, all of the other planets continue to orbit the sun. This explains several Ptolemaic problems, including planetary retrograde. Because the planets are now moving in 2 dimensions of motion around the sun and along with the sun around the Earth, occasionally a planet's independent orbit around the sun makes it appear to reverse direction across the sky from the point of view of Earth, and the fact that it is continuing in a unidirectional orbit around the sun is hidden from us. The second problem with the Ptolemaic system that the Tychonic system addresses is the problem of Venus's phases. In a Ptolemaic system, Venus is always between a stationary Earth and a mobile sun, causing the side of it lit by the sun to be invisible from Earth. However, the Tychonic system allows for Venus to sometimes be in between the Earth and the sun, which means that the side of Venus visible from Earth wouldn't be lit, and sometimes have the sun between the Earth and Venus, meaning that you see a fully lit side. As Venus orbits the sun, you see every phase of Venus, just like you see the phases of the moon.
I want to make one very important argument why Copernicanism is really foolish in philosophy, and that's stellar parallax. The movement of the Earth should result in the apparent annual movement of the stars, known as annual parallax. It can be seen here. When the Earth moves from winter to summer, the distant stars should move in relation to the nearer stars. But annual parallax is not observed by any astronomer. Galileo argues this is because the stars are extremely far away, so the movement of the Earth is insignificant relative to the distance of the stars. Yet, if this is true, the stars not only have to be very far away, they also have to be huge. In fact, many times bigger than the entire solar system. This is absurd and foolish in philosophy, as the astronomer Ingoli has argued. Similar, this position was also expressed in the 1616 decree. More importantly, Galileo fails to present a convincing argument for the absence of an observable annual parallax. This absence of a parallax is absolute proof of the accuracy of Tycho Brahe's system, rather than the Copernican system. Because the stellar parallax is absent, the Earth cannot revolve around the sun. The Church is flexible with its interpretation of Scripture. Accurate astronomy is very important for the Church because it helps with calendar reforms and the accurate dating of events such as Easter. Let me repeat Cardinal Bellarmine's stance. It's in Essential Galileo, page 146. We are willing to revise the interpreter of Scripture if there were a true demonstration that the sun is at the center of the world and that the sun does not circle the Earth, but the Earth circles the sun. Galileo does not provide such a true demonstration, and the defense will use words like, well, it's likely, it's probable, but there's no actual physical proof. Galileo's defense of the Copernican system only consists of assumptions and speculation. Therefore, the Copernican system and its thesis should be considered absurd and foolish in philosophy. Thanks.
This is Noah Ellis. No, it's not. Eric Chris
I will begin by talking about sunspots and how they support Galileo's case. In January 1612, Mark Vessler wrote to Galileo informing him of the hypothesis of one Christoph Scheiner concerning the recently discovered sunspots and what they were apparently to him. Scheiner, a Jesuit, hypothesized that the sunspots were solid bodies orbiting around the sun, and therefore leaving the sun perfect and immutable as it would be in the case of a geocentric solar system. Galileo, in his letters back to Vessler, dated May and August 1612, show that through his own observations, Scheiner's hypothesis is completely incorrect. Galileo notes that in his first letter that Scheiner's hypothesis can only be correct if these sunspots were completely, perfectly spherical in shape and were permanent as they went across the face of the sun. Galileo's first observation is that these sunspots were not perfectly circular in shape, rather they were irregular. His second observation was that as the sunspots went across the face of the sun, the sunspots would change shape and even split up during their journey across the face of the sun. Have you ever heard or seen that of a planet that could change shape while it went across its orbit? I haven't. These observations alone would be enough to disprove Shiner, but Galileo also notes that as during his observations, these sunspots would travel together in a group together at the same rate across the face of the sun. This shows that the sunspots are unlikely to be planets orbiting the sun, because it is highly improbable that planets of any size, regardless of how similar they are, would have the exact same size of an orbit and speed. Instead, Galileo attributes their movement to what they share in common, that is, the sun. Therefore, it is much more likely that Galileo's hypothesis, which is that the sunspots are analogous to clouds on Earth and that the sun rotates around its own axis, is correct rather than Shiner's.
All right, now let's talk about simplicity. Specifically, let's talk about the case of the apparent retrograde motion of planets across the sky and the inconsistent speed at which they appear to orbit. The assumptions made in the Ptolemaic and Tychonic system both rely on epicycles, so a planet orbits a fixed point on its orbit, which in turn is orbiting the Earth, and that allows them to orbit on two axes and explains retrograde motion in those systems. So there's that, and the epicycle, of course, having a constant speed as it moves across the sky. Now, the Copernican system completely eliminates the need for epicycles, which are present even in the Tychonic system, and still kind of a problem as they are not. They're not the simplest solution. Would it not be simpler for the planets to be moving around the sun rather than the sun move around the Earth and the planets to orbit in an epicycle around the sun? So the Copernican system, obviously, serves to eliminate the need for epicycles. And instead of orbiting this Earth, we assume Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn all orbit the sun. We can entirely eliminate the need for epicycles to explain the inconsistent observational speed of the planets and apparent retrograde motion. Furthermore, if the Church does truly accept Aristotelian physics, it'll recognize that the epicycle stands in violation of that system because Aristotle postulated that Earth was the center of all rotation and things rotated in orbits around the Earth. And the Tychonic system still has that violation in it. The Copernican system, same thing, much more elegant. The planets orbit around the sun, all of them without epicycles. Would you like me to take parallax or?
Finally, I will address some issues with parallax. So, as they said, parallax is simply the perceived change in position of an unmoving object when someone or something changes their viewpoint. This is most easily seen when someone looks at an object while having one eye closed, then opening that eye and closing the other. The closer the object is, the greater the parallax. And obviously, the farther away an object is, the less parallax there is. So, as my opponents mentioned, parallax can definitively show us whether or not Copernicus is correct with his hypothesis of a heliocentric solar system. However, like they stated, we cannot see any when we look at the stars today. However, that does not mean that parallax is not shown. We could just be unable to see it yet. Were not the moons of Jupiter discovered 20 years ago? Was not two entire new continents discovered 140 years ago? The moons of Jupiter did not just decide to appear when Galileo looked at Jupiter through a telescope, just like the new continents did not just decide to appear when Christopher Columbus went on his voyage. They were there since time began.
Stop there. So, lack of data is not data.
Sure. Thank you, councilors. Mr. Arneson, you offer a cogent explanation of the Tychonic system as a plausible alternative to the Copernican, but unless I missed it, I didn't hear what evidence is there to suggest that that is a more supportable system than the Copernican one?
For both the Copernican and the Tychonic systems, you obviously can't separate yourself from the Earth in order to see the motion of the planets independently. They have to be taken from telescopic observations of the planets as they appear in the night sky. So by the observations, both the Copernican system and the Tychonic system could work equally well. The Tychonic system is just an interpretation of the observations that maintain the geocentricity of the universe.
But there's no better evidence for that than the Copernican system, in terms of what you can observe, right? There's no, in what one can observe through the telescope, there's no greater evidence for that as an alternative, I take it.
That there's no greater Copernicanism or Tychonic system they're equivalent as far as.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Maybe I can follow up with that question and ask about parallax. One of the lawyers for the prosecution insisted that we haven't found parallax, and if the stars are too far away, they'd have to be very, very large. Why is a special body like the fixed stars not allowed to be very large?
Well, there's no limit to how large they can be, but I mean, accepting the Copernican system will make them huge. I mean, when you take the whole system, the stars have to be 1,000 times bigger than this whole system. Well, this is just absurd. This is foolish. This is foolish philosophy. This cannot be true.
Thank you.
So, if I understood correctly, the lack of finding data to support the parallax is itself proof of some kind? I mean, if I take your argument, then could I not also argue that you're also an ape, but you just haven't converted into an ape yet? Or that you might be a unicorn and you simply haven't yet converted, but will one day?
What I meant by talking about parallax is that we cannot just see it yet. It is not proof, or absence of proof is not the same as saying it does not exist. We just cannot see it yet.
But neither is an absence of proof definitive.
Correct.
It doesn't prove an existence of anything either.
Thank you.
But if you do, please speak more slowly.
The absence of proof for parallax is simply down to instrumental error. We don't possess telescopes sensitive enough, telescopes with enough accuracy to pinpoint the amount of parallax because it's so small.
But why should we believe that any kind of improvement will ultimately lead to the detection of something that is utterly speculative?
Well, we brought up some examples. For example, the Medicean stars, the moons of Jupiter. Again, only discovered 20 years ago. And it's not as though they weren't there before we discovered them. Parallax, our argument for parallax it uses the same principle. It's there, we just can't, it's too small for us to detect with our current instruments. So better technology, more parallax.
Nevertheless, one has no evidence for this. Therefore, it's something of a moot point, isn't it? You're arguing for something based on no data, but the hope that you will have the data in the future. I mean, I really do hope that you'll be a unicorn. That would be wonderful. And sacred scripture does support the existence of a unicorn.
Uh, the case for the Copernican system, more than parallax, is simply that it is more elegant. And the parallax is just in support of that.
I'd like to turn that final point back to the prosecution because I do worry about the Tychonic system. Let me preface this by saying I do care very much about the calendars, and I'm not sure why we're so worked up. We'll get our calendars either way. But that set aside, since you take it so seriously, why should I expect or accept a sun to drag along with it so many planets that seem so similar to the Earth, but not the Earth?
Well, as Shiner has shown, these things orbiting the sun, they could just as well be satellites. And Galileo comes up with this argument that they're on the surface of the sun or they're in some sort of atmosphere. He always has a way to move away from original observations. Everybody can see that these are bodies rotating the sun. Why should they be spots all of a sudden? Why should they be on the sun all of a sudden? We've seen the moons of Jupiter. We've seen satellites orbiting planets. So why can't satellites orbit the sun? Why is this impossible?
My question is, why not let the Earth be one of those? Be one of those satellites orbiting the sun? Why not let it? It's
Say,
so
if
like
all of
Venus.
these others can, then
It's
why
like
is it so
Venus.
unreasonable that the Earth not also do the same?
I have to go back to this parallax issue. if you devise a system where the Earth rotates the sun, that's all fine. But then we should observe parallax. And Galileo moves away from this, and he's like, "Oh, well, we don't see it. But the stars are close. How do we solve this? Well, we just put the stars very, 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 very far away. They have to be huge." Well, that's a nice solution to a problem, but I think it's foolish.
Thank you.
Well, did we also not solve our calendar problem rather recently with the construction of Gregory's Tower? And we changed from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. I mean, that was a traumatic enough experience. We had weeks disappearing. Would you have us change our calendar again so soon? What's defective about the current system? Why can we not continue?
We should probably cut it then.
Why would changing a solar system change our calendar?
Because if I understand, you are changing the orbits.
We are changing what orbits, not the orbits.
Ah. So would you then say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Finish. Yeah, go.
Okay.
1 minute.
So then you're going to insist on keeping your proposed solar system in keeping with the current calendar and the current data that exists for solar movements.
Correct.
Well, good, because I really didn't want to change the calendar.
Thank you very much, councilors.
So we now move to the question of the motion of the Earth explicitly, and prosecution is.
Galileo's theory of relative motion relies heavily on simplicity and probability. The Church strongly believes that simplicity and probability are not sufficient within themselves to advance heliocentrism as a physical reality. One has to simply look at the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky and absorb how they all revolve around a stationary Earth. All empirical evidence from our perspective clearly shows that the Earth is fixed and that everything rotates around us. We feel motionless and we experience the sun, the moon, and the stars and the planets spinning around us. And how is it that the centrifugal, gravitational, and inertial forces all somehow manage to negate each other all so perfectly that no one has ever felt the slightest hint of motion or resistance? And how is it that events such as earthquakes or meteors entering our orbit don't resonate, shift, or alter our motion? Therefore, the burden of proof is on Galileo to prove without a shadow of the doubt that the Earth is in constant motion. What we find intriguing is that Galileo does not consider Tycho's system at all, despite the fact that the system is the most advanced system in the knowable scientific community. In his system, the Earth is motionless at the center of the universe. The planets revolve around the sun, but the sun, together with all the planets, move around the Earth, daily in a westward direction and annually in an eastward direction. Galileo also treats the tides as a phenomenon that can only be understood if one considers the Earth in motion. And in order to treat it as the only solution, he dismisses Kepler's lunar tide theory as occult instead of seriously engaging with the idea. In 1609, Johannes Kepler suggested that the gravitation of the moon causes the tides. He tried to explain the currents of the tides as the result of the Earth's rotation and revolution around the sun. Galileo, however, believed that the oceans moved like water in a large basin, and as the Earth shakes, so does the water. Therefore, the Earth revolves. The force of Earth's rotation causes the ocean to accelerate and to pull back and forth the tides.
Galileo's oversight of other solutions to the problem of the tides is even more problematic because his theory plainly contradicts his principle of relative motion that he sets out in the second day of the dialogue. As Salviati states here, this is page 201 in the Finocchiaro, whatever the motion of the Earth is, it must remain completely imperceptible and seem non-existing for us living there and sharing that motion as long as we look at terrestrial things. But in the fourth day of his dialogue, Salviati advances the idea that the diurnal and annual motions of the Earth counteract each other and cause different parts of the Earth's surface to accelerate and decelerate at varying times, thus creating the sloshing effect that causes the tides. As you can see, the Earth, when the diurnal motion is going against the annual motion, that's when the acceleration and deceleration happens at different points at the Earth's surface. As you can see, the oceans, a terrestrial thing, should share in the motion of the annual and diurnal motions and not be any different than any other terrestrial things on Earth. While this certainly is a novel explanation worthy of hypothetical consideration, it is not only insufficient to advance the idea of the Earth's motion as a physical reality, but also contradicts the reasoning Galileo advances in the second day of the dialogue. The defense may raise the objection that Salviati states that this effect comes from a special combination of the heliocentric Earth's two motions that is spinning on its own axis and also orbiting the sun. But according to Galileo's own rule, these two uniform motions, being common to all bodies on the Earth's surface, should be imperceptible. Again, it's important to consider that how this force, this supposed acceleration and deceleration, can affect a body as great as the oceans, and yet we never feel this. In sum, the prosecution's opinion is that while Galileo's individual arguments in regard to motion are full of novelty and ingenuity, they are contradictory to each other as a whole and undermine the Copernican case as physical reality. Thank you.
Hello, okay. Well, so now we can see that the Aristotelian Ptolemaic system of looking at the universe or the heavens can be questioned, and from a Copernican approach with a moving Earth. So now let's consider the question what the Aristotelians hold about motion on the Earth. And this is, as has been mentioned, very crucial in the arguments. Motion of the Earth is the Earth, if the Earth is spinning, which of course the Aristotelians say cannot be the case. Aristotelians can be questioned and challenged on the basis of their favorite ground of common sense. They are convinced that the senses tell us the whole story and that sight and touch would be invalidated if the Earth were spinning around on its own poles in a diurnal motion. Bodies are seen to fall straight down in straight lines. The Earth is at rest. We can't feel it move. We can't feel a wind of the resulting from the movement of the Earth. If a falling body moves at a slant, which it must do if the Earth is moving according to the Aristotelian way of looking at the universe and motion on the Earth, why do we see it falling straight? Are the senses not to be believed? In answer to this, imagine someone seated on a boat looking at another boat moving on a body of water, for example, the Adriatic. He cannot tell without looking at the shore whether his own boat or the boat of the other person or the other boat moving is in fact moving along the water. The senses do not tell the whole story. Now we can see if the Earth is spinning, nor can we see if the Earth is spinning or not spinning by the standards of a falling body. And then what about this problem? If the Earth is spinning around like a potter's wheel, why don't loose objects on the surface of the Earth, such as birds and clouds, get thrown off the Earth, just as loose clay gets thrown off a potter's wheel as it spins around? Galileo explained that such objects participate in the motion of the Earth's spinning motion. In other words, they share the motion. And again, on a moving boat, a stone is dropped from atop of the mast. Where will it land? According to Aristotelians' concept of earthly motion, it must land away from the mast as the boat moves away from the falling stone. But no, that's not what is seen. The stone lands at the base of the mast, just as if the boat had not moved away from the stone. So again, Galileo has to point out that the stone also has the boat's motion. It's participating in two motions. It's necessary to understand. As the boat and the stove move horizontally, while the stone falls vertically. The two motions work together. so also bodies falling on Earth share the Earth's spinning motion. For Aristotelians, this cannot be the sharing of motions, since they claim the two different motions cannot be added together, and hence they cannot understand that the Earth can be moving. They cannot understand this mentally. Finally, regarding the tides, I'm not going to address exactly and head on the issues that have been raised, simply to ask a very basic question. Can an actual physical proof that the Earth moves be found? This was a big question that Robert Cardinal Bellarmine asked in 1616. And he said that if, as has been noticed, if such a motion or such a proof can be found, then we have to readdress our literal interpretations of Scripture, particularly Joshua. So far, no adequate physical explanation has been offered. So we seem to be left with what? A miracle from the hand of God. This is a supernatural explanation, not, am I done? Okay. One last sentence, okay. But Galileo asks us to consider this. There's a large body, the Earth, that can move and has the force as it moves in the combined circles that were displayed here to impart a force to the moving waters, giving a back and forth movement to the waters. And imagine a ship full of water bringing water to Venice for the Venetians to drink. As the ship speeds up, the water collects at the back. As the ship slows down, the water collects to the front. This is a clear analogy to what's happening with the Earth as the oceans shift back and forth and produce the tides. So now I must stop.
I'd like to turn to the defense. Once again, we have promises of proofs to come. Promises of proofs to come, promised proofs of parallax, promised measurements of parallax, promised demonstrations of the motion of the Earth. Why should we wait for these promised and hoped for proofs to overturn the Scriptures?
Well, because we've had to wait, as has been largely already corrected, we've had to wait for discovering, for example, the satellites of Jupiter. The development of natural science is a gradual development that occurs over time. So while in contrast with the knowledge of revelation that's already in the Scriptures, we don't have to wait for it anymore. It's there, but it's quite different for investigating what happens in nature on the face of the earth. Is that okay?
Thank you, sir.
Well, I'd like to give the female prosecutor an opportunity, since this is all on record, to perhaps recant her argument before I bring her up on different charges. You see, because your argument is that the Galilean defense is based upon simplicity, mere simplicity and probability, but is not God himself simple. Moreover, to go into to defame probability, now you are tapping into a very lively and ongoing debate between the Dominicans, who are of course correct, and the Jesuits, who are incorrect, concerning the nature of moral theology and probabilism versus probabiliarism. You would seem to be arguing with the Jesuits for probabilism, and
That works for me, by the way.
this is very problematic.
Well, I'm going to have to disappoint you and say that I do side with the Jesuits. And while we believe that God is simple, we don't necessarily believe that the way he shows himself is, and that we don't necessarily believe that in waiting and, we don't necessarily believe we just have to constantly be waiting for the possibility of, in the future, being able to prove what Galileo currently is proclaiming as the truth.
Thank you.
So I'll call the prosecution back to the microphone. I'm disturbed by the invocation of Kepler's astrological theory of the tides. Shall we not protect man's freedom as well as the water from the influence of the stars?
The problem is not so much that Galileo ignores this theory in particular. It is that Galileo considers no other theory as sufficient to explain the phenomenon of the tides. And this is the quote from Salviati. "I do not think that either stubbornness or intellectual subtlety can ever find solutions to these difficulties, the difficulties being the tides, and consequently uphold the Earth's stability against them as long as we confine ourselves within natural limits." So we only know Kepler not as an actual case, but as just simply a counterpoint.
Oh, sorry, can I ask another question? Yeah. So back to the prosecution. So undermining Galileo's tides is not to undermine his argument against the accessibility of the stability of the motions to the senses. You have shown us that perhaps there are problems with Galileo's argument for the tides, but you haven't shown us that there's evidence from the senses for the stability of the Earth.
That is true. We assume that that was common sense. That Galileo raises the point that, or Salviati raises the point that the theory of relative motion, that whatever the motion of the Earth is, that things will remain unmoved to us. So Galileo raises this point that things will remain unmoved whether the Earth is moving or not, and that the fact that his theory for the actual motion of the Earth, as raised through the theory of the tides, negates this point, seems to point to the other solution to that initial problem of the things remaining in motion, that the Earth's motion is none.
Well, isn't it also possible it's just that the movement is so slow that you can't perceive any movement in the objects?
That is a good point. I spoke with a mathematician about this, and because I did not know this. I thought that the motion would be that the deacceleration and acceleration would be quite great, but it comes down to the fact that it would be roughly, the acceleration would be 3 miles per hour, so that, basically that the Earth would accelerate 3 miles per hour. Right. So basically that's, it would be as if it took you through an hour to start walking. So we play this both ways. As the prosecution, we would raise that even if this were to exist, it's not enough. It's the tides.
Thank you. Thank you.
To just address the issue of different kinds of knowledge we seem to be involved in here, that, Judge Distelzweig asked why we should be willing to wait and hope. The whole process of developing natural knowledge is a time-consuming process. The knowledge that, again, just reiterating what was said before, the knowledge that we gain from searching the scriptures, it's already there, it's given to us, and we rethink it and rethink it. But the knowledge that we gain from searching nature has not been given to us. We have to go to nature and continually look at it and find new things, in some contrast to studying the scriptures. And remember that we're talking about God's two books, the book of Revelation and the book of Scripture, and they cannot contradict. And may I address the issue of the tides, where the prosecutor says that Galileo does not consider any other explanations. That's not true. Galileo does consider, asks about the possibility of someone saying that the tides are there because of heat, the heat expanding water and causing the tides, and he dismisses that. Another explanation had been offered, that the different surfaces underneath the water could cause a variation of tides throughout the earth. He dismisses this because it's too it's too broad, too general. So Galileo does consider this, but he is asking this question of natural knowledge, not knowledge gained supernaturally, but naturally through our minds. And this, the closest answer we get is, on that basis, is the motion of the earth that has enough power to move the tides.
Thank you, Councilor.
Moving to group three, topic three, the interpretation of scripture. We will have a changing of the teams here.
A lot more fun than my questions. I didn't even bring up Occam. They were invoking Occam's razor.
So, saying the case against Galileo this is Carl Blagan and his partner Stuart Levesque.
We hold that the Copernican system is contrary to Scripture and cannot be taught as fact. We acknowledge that the book of nature and the Holy Scriptures, both being true, cannot contradict each other. And it may be that at some time in the future, we may have new information and observations that verify the truth of the Copernican system or something like it. If the church, after careful consideration, determines that such information is true, it will revise its interpretation of scriptures in accordance with that knowledge. It may also be that the human intellect and the human senses will never be adequate to come up with any such knowledge. In any case, at this time, we hold that we do not have such knowledge with certainty, and that the church ought to continue to enforce the traditional interpretation of the scriptures and the interpretations of the church fathers that the earth does not move. Galileo's writings in the dialogues show indisputably that he holds to the Copernican doctrine, which has been declared heretical by the church. His holding of these views and his publication of the dialogues are clearly in violation of various decrees and injunctions from the year 1616. In his writings before 1616, Galileo presumes to interpret the scriptures While Galileo states he is a conscientious Catholic and that he is attempting to support and assist the Church, this is a task for which he is not qualified and has no authority. The interpretation of Scriptures is reserved solely for the Church.
So as Carl mentioned, much has been made of Galileo's argument that he makes in the letter to the Grand Duchess Christina that nature and the Scripture are mutually compatible, that there are mutual truths. And he cites a lot of Catholic scholars, including St. Augustine, to prove this, he says. And we agree with all this. This is all true according to the Church. It's always been true according to the Catholic Church. That's why St. Augustine said it. And Cardinal Bellarmino said it to Foscarini, another clergyman. And I'm quoting from a letter he wrote him when he said, I say that when there may be a true demonstration that the sun is the center of the world, then it will need to be carefully considered in explicating the Scriptures that appear contrary. But I will not believe that there may be such a demonstration until it is shown. So that's all true. However, the key point is that while Galileo is right about the necessary compatibility of Scripture and nature, he was wrong to assume that he is the person that should establish their mutual compatibility and their mutual truth. And we know that based on the Council of Trent. As Catholics, we know that based on the Council of Trent. And now I'm going to quote from the fourth decree a decree from the fourth session of the Council of Trent. Furthermore, in order to restrain petulant spirits, the Church, decrees that no one, relying on his own skill, shall, in matters of faith and of morals pertaining to the edification of Christian doctrine, resting the sacred Scripture in his own senses, presume to interpret the said sacred Scripture contrary to that sense which Holy Mother Church, whose it is to judge of the true sense and interpretation of the Holy Scriptures, hath held and doth hold, or even contrary to the unanimous consent of the Fathers, even though such interpretations were never intended to be at any time published. So it may be true that Galileo is an expert in natural phenomena, although based on what we've heard, we don't even know that much is true. But he is a philosopher and a mathematician, not a theologian, and that is the key distinction here. It's not about what is being said, it is about who is doing the talking. And Cardinal Bellarmino, who presided over the case in 1616, said as much then. He wrote, and this is in his letter to Foscarini, he wrote, "It is not a matter of faith on the score of the subject, it is a matter of faith on the score of the speaker." And so, just to summarize, to close up, it's about who's doing the talking. And our opponents will probably say that there are a lot of people in the Church who agree with Galileo who are saying the same things. And that very well may be true. And I would ask the judges and you all to ask yourselves, what does that matter? They're part of the Church, Galileo is not. That is the key distinction. That is, all we need to know. They may be able to make that call. It may be possible that they're also committing heresy. Who knows? Those cases will need to be litigated themselves. But this one right now is, we know that Galileo is not a clergyman, and so he's not capable of interpreting Scripture based on the Council of Trent and Catholic teaching going way back. So,
thank you.
I'd like to ask that your holinesses have ready your 1616 editions of these two books we've given you, because I'm going to be citing from them a bit. All right. As dear friends of Galileo who seek not only his best interest, but also that of the Holy Catholic Church and the people of God, we would like to bring forth several points that clearly show Galileo's innocence before God and the Church. Our friend is being tried for vehement suspicion of heresy, for advocating the Copernican doctrine and therefore holding and defending as probable a thesis which is contrary to the Holy Scriptures. We have many points of evidence we'd like to bring up that we believe lead to the conclusion that Galileo has committed neither of these offenses. First and absolutely foremost is the undeniable fact that Galileo sees himself purely as a scientist, no more and no less. To cross a line from natural science to scriptural interpretation is the last thing Galileo would ever want to do. He sees his domain as a scientist, not as a biblical interpreter. He holds the authority of the church and the church fathers so highly that he would never dare put himself in the role of interpreting scripture. Galileo sees his role as an astronomer and a mathematician in the service of the Lord. And as such, he believes it is his job to bring forward his observations to the church so that they may then determine how the scriptures should be interpreted. Nowhere has he wished to interpret scripture for himself in light of his astronomical observations. He has only hoped that he may supply the church with all he can provide with his research so that they may not lack any knowledge of the natural world as they seek to help the people understand the Holy Word. This is Galileo's purpose in his recent work, The Dialogue Concerning Two Chief World Systems. We believe the following examples support this claim. 1, that the clergymen and even inquisitors have given approval and affirmation to the very scientific work for which Galileo is now under suspicion of heresy. First of all, on page 42 of Mayor, Cardinal Conti responds to Galileo as he has written to the cardinal in order to know whether or not his astronomical work could be at risk of offending the Holy Scriptures, so that he may take great care to avoid such a horrific mistake. There's no indication in this letter, written by the cardinal himself, that Galileo should immediately stop dealing with a theoretical Copernican system, as this is what he's doing. He's not positing it as a fact. He's dealing with it in a theoretical world. On page 86 of Mayor, we see that the Inquisition saw very little in Galileo's letter to Castelli that was in need of change, but only 3 small things that were not ruled heretical, but simply needing a slight change of wording to affect the tone or impression that might be given. We know that this is not simply a flaw in the strictness of the Inquisition of that time, since Foscarini's similar letter was deemed as heretical, as can be seen on pages 94 and 95 of Mayor. On page 104 of Mayor, we see that Bellarmine declared that Galileo, quote, has not abjured by promulgating the idea that the earth moves around the sun, because it was in a purely hypothetical sense. This gave Galileo the impression that the type of purely theoretical work he was doing was in fact not stepping out of his bounds. Then Galileo in 1623 met with Pope Urban VIII to discuss his ideas for his next book. And we can believe with very good surety that he went away thinking, with the impression from the Pope, that this was okay to go ahead and write what he was about to write. Him and the Pope were on good terms. Next, Ingoli, in fact, asks Galileo, Ingoli being a priest himself, to defend Copernicanism, which is why he says in his letter to Galileo, let it be your choice to respond to this either entirely or in part, clearly at least to the mathematical and physical arguments for the investigation of the truth, which you profess yourself always to search for by all strength. Galileo here is clearly being asked by a priest to show the mathematical and physical arguments for Copernicanism, because this is purely a discussion of hypotheticals. So a priest is asking him to do this. How is he supposed to respond? Any response he gives to this letter is purely his attempt to help a priest better understand how mathematics and physics in many ways support a hypothetical Copernican system, per his request. The second piece of evidence that weighs strongly in Galileo's favor is his own history of piety and absolute commitment to and love for the Catholic Church. Again, it is always Galileo's first goal to make sure he's dealing well within the bounds of his humble role as astronomer, and no more. Consider the following. Galileo, just as shown, keeps close friendships with many clerics and pious men within the church. Among these are priests, cardinals, and even the Pope himself. Next, he's recorded saying he believes heresy to be, quote, more abhorrent than death himself. Could a guy who says that really commit heresy? Next, his knowledge of and support for the church fathers are demonstrated in his writings, most specifically his reverence for, in his words, the holiest and most learned fathers. This can be seen in his letter to the Grand Duchess. Lastly, his own daughters are nuns and think very, very highly of their father. Okay, so we would like to conclude by drawing your attention to page 74 of Mayor, where Bellarmine, as has already been quoted several times, says, When there may be a true demonstration that the sun is the center of the world, then it will need to be carefully considered in explicating the scriptures that appear contrary. But I will not believe that there may be such demonstration until it is shown to me. Is this not explicitly stating that showing possible evidence for this theory would be the job of none other but an astronomer? Galileo shows his evidence just as Bellarmine asks and trusts the church and the church fathers to interpret scripture accordingly. He even offers many examples of hermeneutical strategies from holy and revered church fathers such as Augustine and Tertullian in his letter to the Grand Duchess. If one believes that Galileo was overstepping his bounds and attempting to interpret scripture on his own in this letter, let the listener bear in mind that 1 year later he was declared by Bellarmine to have not abjured. After the decree of the Congregation of the Index in 1616, Galileo rarely mentioned scripture at all in his writings, so as to stay as far away as possible from taking on the role of scriptural interpreter, knowing that this role is reserved for priests and the Pope alone.
Actually, I'm sorry, you stepped away from the microphone. Can we start with you there? I appreciate your impassioned defense of your friend's intention not to do anything contrary to the church, but the charge is that he holds and defends a thesis that is contrary to the Bible, not that he intends to do something that acts in a way. I mean, are you saying he in fact does not hold a position that is contrary to Scripture, or simply that he's not intentionally trying to interpret Scripture?
Well, he's been told not to posit this as factually what actually exists. That is the decree.
So you're telling me he does not believe any of these, any of what we've been discussing and hearing about?
He simply has stated that according to mathematics and astronomy, which he sees as the only realm in which he is capable of making some sort of statement, there is evidence for this kind of a system if we're discussing this as a hypothetical possibility, which, by the way, he's asked by priests and clergymen to address. And so what is he supposed to do when a priest asks him, defend the Copernican system for me? In a hypothetical discussion,
It's true, is it not, that he publicly has taught that the sun is the center of the universe and immobile, and that the earth revolves around the sun? I mean, that students of his are running around saying this is what?
Well, students run around saying a lot of things.
Touche.
If you could give me a direct citation of his lecture of him saying that, although from what I know of Galileo,
So you're telling
he would
me he's
not.
never publicly, made
Said
the
that
claim
this is
that
fact.
this is true. This is all
He
hypothetical.
simply stated, if, all I can do is look through my telescope and tell you what I see. I'm doing math. I'm telling you this seems to support this. I mean, he's offering evidence so that the church can then take Scripture and interpret it the way that they see fit.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt at this point. If he's a servant of the church, he should be talking privately to the members of the clergy and to the hierarchy. He should not be publishing snarky books.
In fact, does not the authority of Holy Mother Church reside in the church as a conciliar body and in the Holy Father as a person, not in any individual cleric? Just because some rogue priest wants an explanation of the mathematics, when he has been specifically told not to speak of this in public, should he not have demurred?
I guess all I can say in response to that is where you understand him putting it forth as absolute fact or simply responding in a hypothetical sense, this is theory, this is evidence that could potentially support it. He hasn't been told you can't state the word Copernicanism or talk about it. He's simply been told you can't put it out there and say, I absolutely believe this to be true and we need to change Scripture. Nowhere does he say, we need to throw out Scripture and change it.
I have two further difficulties with claims that you've made. First, you would seem to be trying to impugn the reputation of the Holy Father, Urban VIII, by claiming that he in some way authorized this rogue to publish a book contrary to church teaching. Where is the papal bull that authorizes this publication?
I think that has been lost somewhere.
So you would seem to be claiming authority of such a eminent authority of the church without any proof whatsoever.
This is true. I was simply pointing out that Galileo had conversation with Pope Urban VIII and went away, and from what we know of such a pious man, it would seem to contradict what we know that he would have a conversation with this man who gave him the impression, do not publish this book, and then he'd go on to publish the book. And the book doesn't state anywhere that this is absolute fact, and nowhere does he state that we need to change Scripture. He simply posits,
Yes,
here's
but
the evidence as an astronomer.
You keep saying that it's okay if it's only a theory. Now, what would you say to some scholar of sacred scripture who would say, well, now it's only a theory that I have, but God did not create man to be good. He created him in a corrupted form. But this is just a theory, you know.
That was the decree of the church. Bellarmine said, if there is evidence out there that could contradict the scriptures, then we'll have to change the scriptures, but I haven't seen it yet. He doesn't say, don't try and bring any evidence to me. He says, if it's out there, I haven't seen it yet, which seems to be saying, if it's out there, you can show me, but I'm not going to change the scriptures until I see that there's absolute evidence.
And do we not have a mechanism for that data to be brought to the church in an approved and confidential way?
I don't know.
Instead of just throwing it out there willy-nilly. What about the poor simpletons out there that you might be misleading by this theory? Do we not have a duty to protect their souls?
I guess in Galileo publishing his book, he thought that it was not in contradiction to the scriptures, since...
and in fairness, that's not the charge we're bringing against...
Oh, but it was just too much fun. I couldn't resist.
I know. Calm down,
we should give the
calm down, honey.
we should give the prosecution some trouble.
Oh, good, yes.
So I'm deeply concerned that we will be making rash judgments here on the interpretation of the scriptures when it's quite possible that further knowledge will come our way, further observations will be made. Aren't we being rash in insisting that the Copernican hypothesis is in fact contrary to Scripture?
Our position is that it is contrary to our understanding of Scripture at this time. That as we've been listening for the last hour, there are problems with all theories of the arrangement of the universe. Our position is that we do not have adequate knowledge at this time to change our interpretation of Scripture.
But shall we condemn a man for it?
We are condemning him for advocating a position that he knew he was not to publish about. Further, we come here to the difference between discussing something hypothetically and something in fact. And it is quite clear in the dialogues that he is discussing the Copernican system as a fact. And knowing that, I believe we can read his previous writings in a different light and say that, yes, he was interpreting scriptures in the letter to Grand Duchess Christina and the letter to Castelli.
But surely as your colleague across the aisle has pointed out, he's just presenting arguments for and against both sides. This is a hypothetical exercise. How can they be interpreting Scripture in a hypothetical, mathematical, philosophical exercise?
I would be willing to treat it as hypothetical up to but not including the dialogues. I can read, and I know satire and ridicule when I read it.
Thank you.
But now, before you walk away, did not Galileo proactively solicit input from the Holy Office of the Inquisition? Would that not have been the time to instruct him not to publish? Isn't this a little late to come to the game?
The structure of the Inquisition, the methods of censorship were highly involved and slow and unclear. And Galileo took advantage of those to publish before the process had been completed.
So you're telling me that my brother priests in the Holy Office are in a defective system that you don't approve of?
Pretty much.
It's not for
That's
me
what
to
I'm
approve
hearing.
or disprove. I am observing a fact.
Really?
Yeah, I would just add that, I mean, he asked for their input, but they didn't write the book. I mean, they gave him some pointers, and then he wrote the book, and it turns out that we're arguing it's heretical. And so I think, the question is, should the church correct its mistake? If we didn't stop him from publishing this heretical material, we're not just going to let it happen because he consulted the Inquisition. I mean, it turns out that he consulted the Inquisition, and he went farther than they thought he would, and so now we have to correct the mistake and condemn him.
So now you're saying that Holy Mother Church
all right.
is making mistakes willy-nilly?
No, well, I mean, I'm just saying that the church can't know everything. I mean, Galileo could have
Really?
come with everything.
I think I'm going to start the fires. Get them warm for you, counselor.
So now we're going to condemn him because he went a little further than they thought he was going to do, and they actually gave him permission to do something. That's a little rough.
Yeah.
All right. We believe that Galileo has violated the laws and orders of the Church, specifically the 1616 decree, and has defended and held Copernican beliefs. Our main evidence comes from the preface and final passage of the dialogue, as well as his reluctance to come to Rome to defend himself. First, the passage to the discerning reader, which you can see on the screen behind me. I'll give you a minute to read it. The top. This evidence in the dialogue clearly points that Galileo admits to defending the Copernican hypothesis, and he goes even further to claim that anybody who doesn't agree with this hypothesis is embarrassed, and that means the church, of course. Galileo claims to defend the hypothesis and thinks he can get away with it because his work is a purely mathematical hypothesis. But, as we can see as a main piece of evidence in day 4 of the dialogue, when he discusses the tides, it's a very empirical and observational argument that he makes, discussing the daily motion of the tides, the monthly motion of the tides, including the moon, and the yearly motion of the tides that concerns directly the motion of the earth around the sun. Obviously a heretical claim. All 3 of the reports submitted by members of the church about his dialogue determine that he must be defending the Copernican hypothesis, and this can be found on pages 163 and through 165 of the Mayer text. And on page 120 of Mayer, the Inquisition has a list of wrongs that I'd like to direct your attention to. Number 4 on this list is he treats the matter of Copernicanism as undecided, as if one should wait for a resolution and that the definition has not been presupposed. As we know, the church in 1616 decided this once and for all, that the earth is motionless and that it does not revolve around the sun. Additionally, number 8 on the list, having badly reduced the existing flux and reflux of the tides to the non-existent sun stability and Earth's mobility, is further evidence that Galileo must hold these Copernican beliefs because he's assuming they must be true to prove his points in the text. Number 2 on the list is something that my partner will talk more about.
Okay, so Galileo is claiming to be innocent of the charges brought to him. However, he chose to ignore the summons that was sent to him on September 23rd, 1632. Instead of coming to Rome as he was summoned, Galileo chose to write a letter in which he claimed that while he was more than willing to answer any questions the Inquisition had for him, it had to be on his terms. He claimed to be too sick and too old to travel to Rome, which we find out is not the case. The Inquisition granted Galileo some time to get better because he had always been a friend of the church. But each time Galileo was asked about his health, he came up with another excuse to not come to Rome. It took him 5 months from the time he received the summons to the time he finally arrived in Rome. And when he did show up in Rome, he was in perfect health. Why wouldn't he want to come to Rome if he was so innocent as he claims to be? That doesn't seem like something an innocent person would do. Another point I'd like to address is that Galileo and Pope Urban VIII used to be very good friends. As a matter of fact, Galileo and the Pope had wonderful discussions about Galileo's The Assayer. Pope Urban even had a favorite quote from it. One of the conditions that Galileo was supposed to meet when he wrote the dialogue was Pope Urban's favorite passage in the text. Galileo must have taken Pope Urban as a fool because while he did put the passage in the book, he did so in such a way that he mocked Pope Urban and the church. There are 3 characters in the dialogue, Segredo, Salviati, and Simplicio. The character that delivers the passage that Pope Urban loved so much was none other than Simplicio, the simple-minded fool. And as you can see in the bottom passage, about 3 lines down, this is Simplicio talking. He says, but from such feeble ideas of the matter I have formed, I admit that your thoughts seem to be more ingenious than many others that I have heard. So he's basically saying that Galileo is right in there that the church has outdated opinions and that Galileo is right. Now, just because Galileo used to be good friends with the Pope and just because he flattered him in the past, doesn't mean he can do and get away with whatever he wants. The injunction was very clear. Galileo was not to hold or defend opinions of Copernicanism contrary to the teachings of the church, and he was not to teach it. Galileo clearly violated the injunction by writing the dialogue.
This trial, fundamentally, is about the politics found within the papal court, politics which Galileo Galilei is a victim of. The papal court, although rooted in the Catholic Church, is nonetheless forced to abide by the proceedings of any other court, including the patronage game. Pope Urban VIII plays the important role in the patronage game as the courtly prince, the man who holds all the power and must defend his honor by any means. When the power of a prince is questioned, there is one absolute way of cleansing his court of that doubt, known as the fall of the favorite. The fall of the favorite occurs when a close client and friend of the princely patronage is stripped of his title and removed from court, a ritual sacrifice, to reassert the prince's power, which often leads to unjust and unfair hearings. Galileo has unknowingly set himself in a position to become the sacrificial lamb the fall of the favorite requires by his known patronage of Urban, evident by the dedication in the Assayer and the controversy Galileo's dialogue has stirred up in the church. The reason Urban needs to reassert his power is that we've entered the 15th year in a war against the Protestants. They've won a large victory in Lutzen last November, demonstrating that the church is not as powerful as we believe. Urban is in a situation where his power is in question, where he needs a demonstration capable of quelling the doubt, a demonstration such as the fall of the favorite, which he can do with Galileo. It is important to note that the Jesuits, who have gone from supporting Galileo's work to passionately opposing it, have actively sought to ban the dialogue. This change in feelings towards Galileo can be explained by Galileo's willingness to debate scientifically with them, and his membership to the Accademia dei Lincei, a scientific group locked in a bitter rivalry with the Jesuits. In a letter from Filippo Magalotti to Mario Guidici in August of 1632, the Dominican father Niccoli Riccardi is quoted stating that the Jesuits are persecuting Galileo most sharply after the publication of his dialogue. With the Jesuits standing in the church, they are capable of pursuing Galileo this passionately. With both the Pope and Jesuits' political agenda, it becomes clear that this is not a case about whether or not Galileo has disobeyed the church doctrine. It is a case of politics which Galileo is a victim of.
As a friend of Galileo and a loyal member of the church, I make a plea to find Galileo innocent of the charges brought against him. The evidence demonstrates that he followed the orders and rules set before him by the Inquisition and by associating Pope Urban VIII. I bring to evidence the certificate written and signed by our late Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, signed and dated May 26, 1616, that states that Galileo cannot defend or subscribe to the theory of Copernicism. There is a false injunction being presented that is not officially submitted in church documents. It seemingly was snuck onto the back of another official document of 1616. This document adds another condition that comes into play now with the current charges against him, the condition that he cannot teach Copernicism. This document is false and not in force. Galileo gave a detailed account of the events that occurred in 1616 and didn't recall receiving the orders set within the false injunction. Galileo was allowed to write about hypothetical documents about Copernicism. Galileo states on the title page of the dialogue that this was a hypothetical discussion, and since it was mathematically hypothetical, it did not go against the order set in 1616. He states it again in the preface that it is a hypothetical discussion between three gentlemen. He also followed the proper protocol that was set in place by the Inquisition about publishing works. He received 4 orders from the illustrious Niccoli Riccardi, the master of the Sacred Palace. The Pope only had 3 requests set in place, and Riccardi added another one. Galileo followed all 4 of the orders, which are as follows. 1. Title cannot refer to the tides, but must contain mathematical consideration of the Copernican view, which he follows. He must provide without a doubt, if that the earth moves, then all mathematical evidence be provided. There cannot be any doubt. The entire dialogue is evidence of this. To express that the Catholic Church knows of other astronomical theories and arguments, but they do not adhere to agree with them. He stated that in the preface and the conclusion. The conclusion must soften the impact of the discussions that occurred in the book, and also to add in that the Church's, and in turn the Pope's view, is set in the Aristotelian view. He provides that at the end of day 4. Galileo also had at least 6 meetings with the illustrious Pope Urban VIII in 1624, most possibly to discuss his most newest work, the Assayer, and to get permission to write about Copernicism, as long as it stayed hypothetical. Galileo was also in contact with the master of the Sacred Palace, Riccardi, with revisions of the book, which he amended to fit the demands set by the Sacred Palace. Galileo got permission to have it printed in Florence, with orders to have someone that Riccardi appointed to review the manuscript, Clemente Igade. There are 4 imprimaturs, signatures on the back of the title page, all providing authority to publish this manuscript. There is a substantial amount of evidence to prove that Galileo followed the rules set before him by the Church, and demonstrate that there is too much doubt surrounding these proceedings. He is not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you.
So some advice to the defense: don't badmouth this court or this court's prince. This is no sacrifice of anybody. This is the trial of a heretic. To follow that, I am asked to interpret the scriptures with sophistication and nature with persistence, but apparently I'm to interpret Galileo's dialogue as naively as possible. I know snark when I see it.
Okay, so Galileo, he's been doing this game a long time. So when I say that he unknowingly set himself up to be the sacrificial lamb, which I will use that term because it is perfect for describing what happens in the fall of the favorites, he was not ready for the repercussions of what would happen from his dialogue. As a literary who has published many, many satirical rhetoric about many different topics, he has never found himself in a situation quite like this one. So by saying that...
Right, where he's promoting heresy.
It's all hypothetical. He states it several multiple times that it is hypothetical. Everything in this dialogue is hypothetical, as he states.
The very words he uses could be somebody else's. The style changes. One is in a preface at the beginning. One is in the mouth of a fool. The other is a quick aside that breaks the flow of the dialogue. Am I to take these seriously? Am I to be such a naive reader?
No, but if I publish a book stating that I hypothetically believe that I'm a purple unicorn, would you believe that? If I vehemently believe that, would you believe it? That probably didn't make sense, but you get my point.
I would believe that you believe it, and I believe that Gallo believes. I believe that you believe it, and I believe that Galileo believes, holds, defends, teaches in many ways that the sun is stable and at the center of the universe.
Do you have any quotes besides from the dialogue where he states that the Earth rotates around the sun, that the sun is stable?
It's suggested in Sunspots, it's suggested
But
in
is it
Sayre,
stated? Is it outright stated?
This is not a trial of his books, it's a trial of him in light of the evidence of his books.
But a lot of the evidence comes from his books, does it not? So if you cannot dismiss all of his other works in order to state that this one thing is the reason why he's tried as a heretic, you have to take in consideration everything else.
Is there a reason why he did not have a nihil obstat in addition to his imprimatur? It means that there's nothing objectionable to the faith within.
A ruling that there is no objection, nothing
It means that a censor has gone through and determined that there is nothing contrary to the faith. Therefore, the faithful may have a certain degree of confidence in reading that material, that it will not lead them astray.
I believe the answer is no, isn't it?
Yeah, it's no.
Does it count that he had several letters between the imprinters?
Nope. You either have the stamp or you don't.
I'm assuming.
He's got most of the approvals he needs. I know it does. He has all the approvals he needs. Don't let him railroad you.
Oh.
The problem is that the problem is all those are acquired under false pretense because he does not share with them his injunction, the precept.
Well, but that's different. Well, never mind. I don't want to make their argument for it.
What's that? If he's been ordered by Holy Church not to hold, teach, defend, or in any way.
Part comes from the false injunction.
No, I think it has not been established that this is a false injunction. What is your evidence that this is a false injunction?
Well, the false injunction that was added on
Yes.
the back of another document didn't have his signature.
That's
He
right.
submitted the
Is this the
evidence.
only document in the entire archive of the index that is missing a signature or is missing a dotted I or a crossed T?
Probably not. It is the church. So.
Not helping your cause!
But he had permission from the church to write this.
No,
he sent in all his stuff.
He had the permission from local censors who he didn't inform he had been provided with a precept and an injunction that you still haven't convinced me is false by the index, by the Inquisition, not to teach in any way.
I'm assuming he didn't realize he would have to do that because it was stated that he didn't hold or defend it. It was a hypothetical discussion, and the whole dialogue is a discussion about this theory that is hypothetical. Sorry.
Time for the prosecution. All right, gentlemen. So now, if I've done my math correctly, you're telling me that it's unreasonable that a 68-year-old man would be unhealthy and unable to travel to Rome. 68. The man should be dead. And you're upset that he took 5 months to get better? How is that unreasonable?
Well, if he was so sick as the defense would have us believe, how is he still able to write all these letters and publish all these books in the time, the 5 months that it took him to get to Rome? And then when he shows up, he's in perfect health.
Well, it means that he got better.
Well, I got better.
As opposed to dead. And could he not have retained the services of a scribe so that he might lay upon his sickbed and dictate? These seem reasonable propositions. After all, I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas himself kept 3 scribes busy simultaneously.
Your Honor, surely a man who is so sick to travel only 100 miles to Rome can't be publishing all of this work. This is something that a young man does. He's perfectly healthy. He just doesn't want to come to Rome because he knows what he did was pushing the line and crossing the line. He knows that he's guilty of heresy and guilty of defending Copernican beliefs. He just doesn't want to come.
So 5 months, how long does it take you to send someone to look on him and see how he is and verify his health? If he's only 100 and so miles, I think that could be done in about 5 or 6 days walking. Why didn't one of you go to ascertain his health?
We sent people to ascertain his health, I believe. I think it's in Meyer. Pretty sure.
Then drag him back.
I don't know. I don't know exactly what the details of it was, but regardless, it took him a very long time to get to Rome, and he knew what was coming.
Well, the final letter that was sent to Galileo before he ended up showing up in Rome, the Inquisition stated that if you don't show up, we're going to send people there and drag you to Rome. And then all of a sudden he shows up.
Perhaps they should have sent that letter earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're good.
I think we're good.
I think we're good, thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, wonderful. So, judges will retreat to deliberate about 10 minutes.
I don't know that we need 10 minutes, but we will.
Yes.
Yeah, 5.
5 would be better.
I just want to give the audience now the time while they...
Okay. Where are we? Oh, we're going to the jury room. Here. We're going to the jury room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really, good job, guys.
Good job, guys.
Controversy around dialogue. And the way I understand it seems to be that nowhere in the dialogue does Galileo ever state in his own voice, or in any way that could be consistently aligned with his own voice, let's say, one of the condemned propositions. Nonetheless, people read the dialogue, and on the basis of its tone, or on the basis of its style, they move to say, well, we really know that Galileo believes this, that this is really Galileo's voice. But how can, I mean, that just seems to me a little bit worrying if somehow we're now making the obvious or making a kind of tone of literary text like equivalent to the explicit teaching of the specific proposition. So,
So I think with the tone, it's almost like if you think of like Stephen Colbert, right? When he had his late night show and he's kind of doing satire and everything, you know he might say these crazy things, but deep down he's actually making fun of it kind of the whole time. And that's what Galileo does consistently throughout a lot of his works, not just in the dialogue of the two world systems, but in a couple other ones too that we've talked about in our class, where he has like his patrons representing the views that he really believes, like for instance in the dialogue Salviati and Sagredo, who are both patrons of his, versus versus Simplicius, whose name literally translates pretty well to simpleton. So, yeah, I mean, he's presenting this as a hypothetical thing, and that's kind of what it is at face value. But when you look at like the names, the tone of how he presents everything, really it seems more like he's got a side in this argument, and it seems pretty clear which it is.
I guess you just say like how, but you can condemn a proposition. I just don't see how you can condemn like all the stuff in your document.
Can I argue him? Okay. As a client of like the patronage game, Galileo is supposed to be an entertainer, and if he did not throw that satire in the dialogue, who would read it? Who would honestly decide that, hey, yeah, this huge, thick document just filled with science is something that I want to spend my time on? Like, he needed to have some kind of draw to have people to read it. And he knows that because he is a client in the patronage game. He is there for their entertainment, for their chortles in the villa. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, but I think to answer your question a little bit more, in terms of like, can you say it again really briefly?
Well, I mean, look, I understand. My problem is not, I mean, look, Galileo can do whatever he wants. I just am wondering, like, the consistency with which the church is, what the church is able to condemn. I mean, I understand if the church condemns the stage or teaching of an explicit proposition. I understand less how the church can condemn the, you know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, everybody knows he holds the proposition on the basis of tone and character. That just seems to me to be extremely bad.
So I think part of that is a product of the times. If you look back at what else was going on, kind of as they mentioned, like what we know today is the 30 Years' War. It just started. If you look at like the Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation, all these things, and in particular in Italy, how powerful the church was, how it was the state. There wasn't a lot of wiggle room or leeway. If somebody's making fun of the church, that's a pretty serious thing. You're making fun of the state who is all powerful. So I think it's more of a product of the times why they can even condemn something just because of the tone.
A further contribution. I think the judge said it pretty well. I know snark when I see it. Well, as a non-canon lawyer, I can tell you that winks and nudges are something which are in front of a jury will oftentimes determine whether they believe or do not believe somebody. So if you're looking at it in time, when you look at what the rules were, and almost everything that was literate was written, and when in fact they had a whole history of what they knew when he was pulling their leg and when he wasn't. I mean, this was a writing style, and if you're anxious to find a reason to find somebody heretical, the very fact that he picks certain actors or characters to expound on certain theories and others on different theories, and some are more credible than others, that's precisely what happens. And that's how these decisions are made. So I don't find it all that surprising that they would look at the writings. I mean, that's what critics do when they read Shakespeare. How much hypothesis has there been about what Shakespeare meant in certain parts of his works?
Other questions?
I'd just like to follow up on the very short comment that Galileo was instructed to change the original title of this work from a discourse on the flux and the reflux of the tides. Among these like 4 stipulations, why would that be so important? And I think we've heard about the argument of the tides, but I'm not sure that it became so forceful that this was really what the dialogue was about. That was the culmination. That was day 4 of the dialogue. And this was his presentation of physical proof. This was his answer to Bellamy. This was his putting it back in the face of the church. And I would be very interested to hear what the judges had to say in particular about the argument of the tides.
Let me, before we you all been taught how to use, you have clickers, right?
Yeah, they should do their judge. They need to vote first. Yeah.
How are we gonna vote?
Well, are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's,
So
So
them now vote, get that
the
registered.
screen needs to be on, and then the two buttons on the top row, the one in the corner is yes, A, and the one next to it is B. So the top middle. So it's really simple. Are we ready? Are they ready to do a vote?
Public vote now. When you all have done that, for 10 seconds. And we will reveal, we'll listen to the judges, and then we'll reveal.
We're going to reveal the Patrick's not.
Yeah,
Patrick's
we weren't
not.
gonna give, I have
He's
to
gonna
lead
have to
prayer.
leave, so he's gonna, yeah,
Yeah.
just go. We're here.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Father Toby needs to leave, so.
Did everybody get it?
He's not voting with his feet here.
We have his vote, don't worry.
Do we have everybody's vote? Has everybody voted?
Has everybody voted?
Good.
Have we given enough time, Sean?
Pardon?
Have we given enough time?
Is anyone still thinking, or you all voted? Okay. All right.
All right, voting is now closed for the audience. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you're not going to, you want us to reveal ours before this? Okay. The decision of the court is a 2-1 decision that Galilei is guilty of vehement suspicion of heresy.
You want to see the results of the?
What does that mean?
A is blue, B is orange.
Oh, look at that.
Okay. B is orange.
No.
So
So he's half a heretic.
yeah. So it's a split vote.
Say, what was the question?
Let's leave it to, it's getting late, we should just have a conversation.
What was the question?
Whether we should have a continue a conversation about like what influenced our decision.
Okay, well, good. Unless there's any questions, thank you all for coming.
Really good job, Steve.
Yeah, really good
Thank you.
job.
Yeah, really. Excellent.